welcome to A Healthy Mind. I'm Dr. Cislina Grosser-Ledbetter, Director of Counseling and Student Development at the University of the District of Columbia, and your host. On today's edition, our issue is sexual violence. Joining me to discuss a broad range of issues surrounding sexual violence is Peter Newsham, Assistant Chief of Police for the Metropolitan Police Department. Chief Newsham is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross and holds a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Maryland Law School. He is a member in good standing of the Maryland and District of Columbia Bar Associations. Welcome, Chief, and thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it.
We're excited about talking about this topic, even though it's not a pleasant topic to discuss. Someone has to give audience to this, so thank you so much for joining us. Tell us about how you've been around the department for a while, so tell us a little bit about your path in the department.
Well, I became an assistant chief in 2002. At that time, I was in the Internal Affairs Division. I went to a patrol division, which was called Regional Operations Command North. When Chief Lanier became the chief of police, I went back to Internal Affairs, which investigates police misconduct and use of force. And then in 2009, Chief Lanier moved me into the Investigative Services Bureau, and that's where I serve right now.
Okay. So what is the Investigative Services Bureau related to sexual assault?
Well, just to let you know, the Investigative Services Bureau, there's 4 separate divisions within the Bureau. We have our Narcotics and Special Investigations Division. We have our Youth Investigations Division. We have our Crime Scene Investigations Division, and then we have our Criminal Investigations Division. Our Sexual Assault Unit falls within our Criminal Investigations Division, and that's a group of about 12 detectives and supervisors that focus specifically on investigating sexual assaults.
And has it always been a part of the department and just sort of reorganized, or is it a freestanding, or has it just come about?
Well, no, we've had a sexual assault unit for a number of years. There was a point in our history, and it's been several years ago, where sexual assaults were investigated by our general crimes detectives. But this is a type of case that requires a certain expertise. So we decided, some years ago to develop a specific unit to investigate these crimes in particular.
Okay. So we know that sexual assault is prevalent. Make the distinction for us, if there's one, between sexual assault and rape. Because sometimes we hear sexual assault, and it sounds like on TV anyway, that there's a distinction between rape and sexual assault.
Yeah,
so help us.
I don't, I wouldn't say there's a distinction. I think there's different uses of the language. For the police department, what we do is we investigate sexual abuse, which is defined in the DC code. And so a rape would fall in one of the categories of sexual abuse that we have. There's 4 different degrees of sexual abuse, ranging all from unwanted touching all the way up to what is commonly known as a rape. And that's what, it's just a terminology. Rape is more of a layman's term. Okay. For the police officers, they use sexual abuse.
Okay. So in terms of sexual assault, what is the MPD's role? How do you deal with sexual assault?
Well, I got to tell you, our approach to sexual abuse is, number one, and this is different than any other crime that we investigate, is the treatment of the victim. We need to make sure as a government, as an agency, that we don't re-victimize somebody who's been through that type of trauma.
What does that mean?
The victim of sexual abuse, from everything that we've learned and we've been taught, is traumatized by the event, and it's a significant event, as one can imagine, in their lifetimes. And whenever somebody suffers a traumatic event like that, there's all types of behaviors that can manifest themselves as a result of that trauma, and that trauma, can last a lifetime, and usually does. And so our approach to the victim is a very careful approach, because especially right after the incident occurs, that trauma can cause them to act in a way that they normally wouldn't. And that's just normal human behavior when you're subjected to that kind of trauma.
Give me an example. And they might act in a way that they normally wouldn't.
They might tell you a story that's not actually what occurred.
Really?
You know what I mean? Yes.
And they're not lying.
They're not lying. It's just a result of the trauma that they've suffered. And whenever you're trying to build a criminal case against somebody, that can create difficulty in building a case. So it's, it's a couple of things. You got to, first of all, like I said, you got to make sure you don't traumatize the victim again by what you do or what you say. And there's subtleties that you can say to a victim that could be offensive to them. And we want to try to avoid that. At the same time, if it's a stranger offense and we have a predator out there, we also have to keep the public safety in mind. So we need to try and get as much information as we can, as carefully as we can, and then get that and hopefully capture the person that's responsible for it. The second piece, and this is a piece that I tell all of my investigators in any criminal investigation, young people will ask me, what's the goal of a criminal investigation? And really the goal of a criminal investigation is get to the truth. Young people will say, well, don't you want to catch the bad guy? Of course we want to catch the bad guy. But we don't want to arrest somebody who's not responsible for any crime.
Right.
So in sexual assaults, it's the treatment of the victim, it's to get to the truth. And then lastly, part of our approach is the fact that the approach to sexual assault investigations nationwide is evolving all the time.
Really?
It is, and it's because of this trauma and the approach to the victims. And it's like any other science. You learn, as time goes by, you learn more as a better way to approach these things. And so we have a mindset at MPD that this process has to continually evolve and may have to change as time goes on and as we receive more information on how to treat folks and how to better investigate these crimes. We have to be in a position as an agency to say, we'll change our policies and procedures to adjust to that.
Mm-hmm. And you're in an agency that's flexible enough to do that and work with you.
We are. Police departments have been very, old school,
right.
Traditional. But the thinking, and actually under the leadership of Chief Lanier, Chief Lanier is a very progressive leader.
She's a woman. So.
She is a woman, and that I'm sure
helps.
Sure helps.
Mm-hmm.
And but she's also a very progressive leader. She's
right,
a very
right.
thoughtful leader.
Mm-hmm.
And law enforcement, is slow to change, but some of the leaders actually in some of the major cities now are kind of starting to get it and understand that you have to change.
So what are some of the things that we had so wrong when you talk about working with victims of sexual abuse or assault? What did we do? What are some of the cultural shifts that you would look upon an agency and say, this is just wrong, and it has been for a while?
I think the approach that I mentioned earlier, you can't go in with the mindset that your number one goal is to get the bad guy, because that way you're going to forget about you have a victim here. And if you're not focused on the victim, you could say something which would, and if the victim, in my opinion, if the victim leaves the interaction with the police department worse off than when they started, then catching the bad guy is really secondary. You can't do that to people.
And you said, you said something about the predator being known versus unknown. So we know, and I suspect that this is the same in the District of Columbia, that most of the perpetrators are known. So how does that kind of interfere or play into your investigation when that's often not a factor? Well,
that's a really good point that you're making, and a lot of people should know that more than 80% of the suspects in sexual assault cases are people that are known to the victim. Right. And that, we really need people to know that for a variety of reasons. First of all, the way that you behave and who you may consider could potentially be a suspect will change when you know. Most people, I think, like when you use the term rape, they picture someone in a dark alley, a stranger coming out and attacking someone. Right. And don't make any mistake about it, those types of assaults do occur. And we do have them, unfortunately, in the District of Columbia. But you're more likely to be assaulted by someone you know. It could be a family member. It could be a casual acquaintance that you just met. It could be somebody that you met on campus, for example. Right. So I think you have to, it's unfortunate, but it's true, you have to be cognizant of who you're dealing with at all times. If you're uncomfortable with a person, then you certainly should make sure that you don't go see that person unless you're with a trusted friend.
Yeah, because I think of, when you look at rape statistics, I was looking up rape statistics in preparation for our talk, and sometimes you see these numbers and they're huge, but they're the dark alley numbers in your mind. You're
Right.
thinking, ooh,
Right.
there were 198,000 rapes per year, but they're not all lurking in the back alley waiting for you to knock you out. It
That's-
could be an intimate partner, and more likely is.
Absolutely. And I think, and I say this quite a bit to young people in particular, that the thing that we see which exacerbates these situations most frequently is alcohol and drug use, because people let their guard down when they use alcohol or they use drugs. They're more inclined to put themselves in a position or not be as careful as they probably could be. The other thing that creates problems for us when we have a victim who's used drugs or alcohol is that memories are not as accurate when you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And then one of the things that I've learned about drugs in particular, and this is one of the things that everybody should know, is that many of the prescription drugs that people take, you could be taking it for the first time, and it could be for any number of things. It's, people take prescriptions for all kinds of illnesses and injuries, but if you take alcohol with those, your reaction can be, and what happens is you lose memory. You could actually be functioning, and your memory is gone, so you don't know what happened. And frequently we have victims who come to us and they tell us something happened, but I don't know what.
Wow.
And a lot of times it's a reaction between alcohol and drugs, and it's unbeknownst to the victim, so I'm not blaming anybody,
Right.
but people just don't know when they're taking these medications that if you add alcohol to it, you can have a completely different reaction.
Right, because you think about, you're mixing alcohol with a prescription drug, and it never occurred to me that you would lose memory.
Yep.
I would think, I could see going to sleep, and maybe that's lose memory.
Right,
but if something
right.
has happened and you wake up and you don't know.
Well, we hear stories exactly of people who they were actually functional, but they
Right.
didn't know it. They assumed that they were asleep, and they were actually functioning. And for sexual assault, but for any crime, that's just not a very good state for a person to be in. And I add that to young people in particular. If you're going to go out and you drink, make sure you're with a trusted friend who's not.
Right. So
Somebody who
either
can
the
get you,
designated driver or the designated sober person.
get you home safely.
Right.
You know
Right.
what I mean?
So then, what are some of the things that we could do as a community to address, to deal with, to support victims of sexual assault, or to deal with the issue of rape in the District of Columbia? What could we do?
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot of secrecy in our country around sex, in particular, and I think it's taboo to speak about it. I think that you could probably talk to victims who are embarrassed by the fact that they were the victim, which is, I say those words, and there's no way in the world that anyone should ever be embarrassed by being the victim of this, but people are, and I think that's a reality. And I think what we can do as friends and family of victims, when we learn that they're victims, first of all, is to get them help. It's the number one thing. Get them to somebody who they can talk this out with, because it is going to be something that's going to be traumatic, and it's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. So they need to talk to somebody about it. And then secondly, and this, you don't necessarily have to go to the police, but you may want to convince them that that's something that they ought to do, so that suspect doesn't do it to somebody else. And that's a difficult thing for a person to do.
And there is so much underreporting, and I think about the 95% of women who are that get sexually assaulted, 95% of them do not go forward. So we have a 5% reporting rate, and then we have 1% of those people who actually get a conviction. Why do you think the conviction rate is so low?
I think that, like I said, the closing a sexual assault case is extremely difficult.
Why?
Frequently, there are two witnesses to a sexual assault. Frequently, not always. And so if you're in a closed room and there's two witnesses, there's always going to be two versions. And like I said, you were either the victim of a sexual assault or not. And for both parties involved, the way that juries view this is that you could be sending somebody, taking somebody's freedom, You know what I mean? So that's the way, and you have to, and the only evidence you may have in the case, not always, but is one person's version versus the other, and it comes down to a credibility issue. So,
I see.
yeah, it doesn't. I wish I had a good answer to that question, but it's an extremely difficult crime.
So, switching gears a little bit, how do you work, because we're in a campus setting, thinking about campuses, how do you work with campus police, university police, and sexual assault? Do you get a lot of calls from the area schools about sexual assault? And are those data reported in your DC data?
Well, every time they report to us those cases, then yes, we will capture that information. We work very well with the university police here in the District of Columbia. You know, some of their students are actually juvenile, so my youth investigations division will get involved in those types of cases. But I think the relationship is really good. We meet with them, the heads of the public safety agencies for all of the universities on a quarterly basis, and we discuss, I mean, it's one of the topics we discuss is the sexual abuse. And I think, you know, I think for universities, if university leadership takes the approach that, you know, there's no secrets here, if it happens, we're reporting it. I think that's the best approach for everyone. You know what I mean? It's not something, I think if we have a tendency to sweep this thing under the rug, then more people are going to get away with it. And one thing I didn't add to sexual assault investigations, you know, I said it's one person's word against another, but if that suspect had done it to somebody else and that person hadn't reported it, we wouldn't have two persons' word against one person. So that's why it's important. You never know who that person who else they've done it to.
Is it often that they have?
Oh,
perhaps?
yeah, absolutely. And you can establish a pattern. And like the drug-facilitated sexual assault, where people are putting things in people's drinks. And I know we've heard those stories.
Those games.
Yep. And those are the types of cases, that, you know, it usually, because the drug that they're using incapacitates somebody, makes them go to sleep, the victim doesn't have a tendency to have a great recollection of what happened. But if we can establish a pattern with that particular person, and we've made cases like that in the district, then we get that person off the street.
Wow.
So
is there talking about reporting, is there a database that we report sexual offenders, that we log sexual offenders into, even though they're not minors, even though the victims are not minors?
Yeah, everybody who is convicted of a sexual assault in the District of Columbia.
So it's the conviction that gets them there.
It is. It's a conviction. So and people have to keep that in mind, because a lot of people are accused of crimes, but you have to be convicted. And once you're convicted, part of your sentence is that you're on the sex offender registry for a period of time, and it's usually a significant period of time, depending on, remember I told you about the different degrees,
yes.
Depending on the degree of sexual assault determines how long you'll be on.
Oh, really? I didn't know. It drops off eventually?
If it's an unwanted touching, as opposed to going all the way up to the what you described as a rape, the people who are involved in the rapes will be on there for a longer period of time. Some are placed on the registry for a lifetime.
Okay.
And then the way that works is that if you're on the registry, we have a unit in our police department that will regularly, they have to re-register every year to, you know what I mean? And they had to tell us where their address is. And we have a unit on the police department that will go and they'll visit these people. And depending on what tier of registration you're required to have, you can actually go on the internet and find out who the people are in your neighborhood who are on the sex offender registry.
Which is a very valuable tool.
Especially for people who have children.
Do you know the website?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but you can go onto Google, and if you put sex offender registry, it'll come right up.
That's great.
Yeah, and you can type in your address, and you can see sex offenders that live in your area.
Wow. Is that fair?
Is it fair?
Yeah.
In my mind, it's appropriate.
Okay.
You know, you've been convicted of doing something to a human being that is probably one of the worst things you can do to somebody, and this is your consequence. And so I'm a big believer in consequences for your actions.
Good. I'm thinking so. I'm saying, I think that, yeah, that's correct. So are we doing a good enough job protecting victims of sexual assault? And what can we do better?
Well, I think we can always do better.
Yeah.
I think to the extent that we stop making sex as taboo as we do, you know what I mean? I think more victims are going to be more likely to come forward. You know, sex is a normal human behavior. There shouldn't be a lot of secrets around sex. Like I said, I think if you have family and friends who are victims and they're confiding in you, I think first of all, we need to try and urge them to go get someone to talk to, and then secondly, maybe report it to the police if they want to go through with that.
And there's also the notion that women that dress a certain way are asking perpetrators or inviting some type of ill behavior toward them, some type of sexual assault. So do you know the story of the blue denim day?
No.
Blue jeans. There's a story about a woman who was sexually assaulted in Italy, and a lower court actually did not convict, and it was overturned by a higher court that said that her clothes had nothing to do with her assault. But the initial was the releasing of the victim, because the lower court thought, if you didn't have on those tight blue jeans, which is what she had. So there are a lot of community-based organizations and universities that have I think it's Blue Denim Day, and it's, I believe, April 27th every year,
Okay.
Since 1999, to bring awareness to the fact that it's not about what you wear. It's about the mentality of the perpetrator.
100%. You can never blame the victim of any crime, but in particular, sexual abuse. It's
Right.
not, there's nothing that a victim does that would suggest that type of behavior should happen. And I think you're very well aware of this, that sexual abuse is not a crime of somebody's sexual desire. It's an aggressive, violent act by a predator. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a violent and inappropriate act by a predator, and in no way, shape, or form should we ever blame the
Right.
victim for that. And to blame somebody for what they're wearing,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
and it's I'm thinking that that's probably where initiatives like having units with trained officers that are used to dealing with focusing on the victim sort of evolved out of,
Right.
not focusing on the victim and not the perpetrator until it's time to switch gears and talk about and focus on the perpetrator.
Yeah, and that's another thing that comes to mind as you say that, is that, if we do have a case of sexual abuse, the first responding officer is going to be one of our uniform officers, who may not necessarily have the in-depth training that our people in our sex unit have. And so what we tell those folks, and they've been directed, is to, as soon as possible, to get one of the trained people to the scene.
Are the trained people, because I think you said you have a 12 thereabouts, are they all women? Are they mostly?
No, it's a
are they-
combination
a
of
combination?
men and women. Yeah.
That's good, because
Yeah.
men also get sexual assaulted,
They do.
and men can handle
Yep.
sexual assault victims that are women
Absolutely.
carefully.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's, that's another thing when you talk about not re-victimizing the victim. If a victim tells us, hey, listen, I only want to speak to a man, or I only want to speak, then we're going to accommodate that. There's not going to be any questions. We're not going to say, and one of our trained detectives will know, hey, listen, this is what they want,
Yeah.
and this is something we should provide for them.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. How do we fare in terms of a community? Because urban centers, by and large, fare probably a little bit worse than the suburban communities. But how do we, as a district, fare against other urban centers like LA and New York and other cities?
Yeah,
in terms
it's tough to compare it to cities that size. As you know, the district is much smaller, our population is much smaller. But when you compare us to like cities with similar demographics and similar populations, then our sexual assaults run about the same.
Okay.
The numbers run about the same.
Okay.
And I think, a lot of people get into the numbers, and I think we got to be careful about the numbers, because an increase in the number of sexual assault reports is not always necessarily a bad thing, because we have a lot of people who aren't reporting it.
I see.
So if
I
we're
see.
urging people to report it,
I got
a
you.
group just put out the You Ask app. Are you familiar
Yeah,
with
I'm
that?
part of that. That's how I first met you.
Right.
Yep.
And the You Ask app, let me tell you something, what that's going to do, hopefully,
Oh, yeah.
is increase the number of sexual assault reports that we get in the District of Columbia.
And that would be great.
That's a good thing.
Except if you're looking at it with rose lenses and you don't get it.
Yeah, I think
Even-
you have to really understand
Yeah.
that, there's a lot of people that don't report it. We want them to report it.
Yeah, we
So,
do.
We're certainly not getting them all.
Yeah, but we'll be getting more.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I would like to thank Peter Newsham, Assistant Chief of Police for the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police Department, for being my guest. If you would like more information about the topics we discussed, you may contact Peter Newsham, Assistant Chief of Police, at peter.newsham@dc.gov or 202-727-4295. I'm Dr. Cislina Grosser-Ledbetter. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Wasn't that fast?
It was.